Welcome to Agri-Pulse Newsmakers, where we aim to take you to the heart of ag policy. I'm Spencer Chase. Our guest this week is Farm Service Agency Administrator Zach Ducheneaux, who offers an update on USDA's farm programs and the Farm Service Agency workforce. But first, here's this week's headlines. The Environmental Protection Agency rolled out proposed cuts to tailpipe emissions that could lead to a major pivot toward electric vehicles. EPA Administrator Michael Regan was insistent the proposal is technology neutral, but the EPA also produced an estimate that 2/3 of the new cars in model year 2032 would be electric under the proposed standards. The agency estimates the proposal would avoid more than 10 billion tons of carbon dioxide emissions and eliminate the need for 20 billion barrels of imported oil. Consumers shopped for cheaper groceries last month for the first time in 2.5 years. That's the word of the latest Consumer Price Index, which showed grocery prices dropped 0.3% in March. Egg prices dropped more than 10% last month. Meat, milk, and produce prices all declined as well. The overall CPI was up 0.1%. And finally, the Department of Agriculture is showing improvement in its employee satisfaction, but the question remains about whether or not enough people are on the job. USDA was the most improved agency in the federal government in a set of rankings rolled out this week. But the report also shows USDA's workforce shrank by nearly 20% in 2022. Perhaps no agency has more face-to-face interaction with producers than USDA's Farm Service Agency. With county offices across the country, FSA employees are frequently in contact with producers on a daily basis. With busy times ahead for the agency, we started our conversation with FSA Administrator Zach Ducheneaux by asking him, do you have enough employees to do the job?
Our team always manages to get the job done regardless of the amount of work we put on them. And we want to acknowledge that and try to continue to find ways to improve that work stream for them. In our 2,100 offices, we've got around 10,200 people. And there's a little float in that, if you will, where folks are transitioning out while we're transitioning on. We stay just under 10,000 employees because of that attrition. They do a fantastic job of delivering the programs. They demonstrate their commitment to our producers and our mission every day. And when we get the opportunity from Congress to bring some ad hoc assistance, they step right up and we manage to get that out the door alongside with all of the other work that we do. So could we use more resources? Could we take better care of the employees we've got with those resources? Absolutely. And could we use more bodies? I think absolutely.
Secretary Vilsack often makes the point that at one point in time, some of these Farm Service Agency county office jobs were among the best that one could get in a county due to the salary structure, the benefits, things of that nature. But he often says that's not necessarily the case anymore. In your mind, how big of a salary gap do you think you might be dealing with between what you can currently offer folks and what folks will want to receive?
You know, the metric that I use is if all of our staff, based on their family circumstances and the rate that we pay them, no longer qualify for nutrition assistance programs, then we're at that level. So I think that's something that we can use as a target to reach for. We've got a lot of folks in our county offices that qualify for WIC, and we should be thinking about that as a yardstick against which to measure our ability to properly pay our staff.
Mm-hmm. With all of that in mind, I mean, as you think about the fact that Congress does have the upcoming Farm Bill, and of course there's going to be a number of programmatic changes to programs administered by the Farm Service Agency that will be on the agenda. But in terms of this issue, the issue of keeping and retaining staff, is there anything Congress can do to help you in that or maybe any other particular piece of legislation?
One of the big things that Congress can do is continued support for the moves we're making towards more flexible programming, more streamlined delivery of those programs. You know, using ERP phase 1 as an example, where we used that existing data that we already had and delivered a very easy process for folks. We really think that there's value in that, in improving our employee satisfaction improving our producer satisfaction. We saved 1 million hours of staff time with that rollout of that disaster assistance on top of our regular work. So acknowledging that and continuing to support us as we make those moves and understand that there's some growing pains that come with any new process, and we're working through them.
We'll be right back with more from FSA Administrator Zach Ducheneaux right after this.
Regenerative poultry production is a process by which nature can actually recapture and restore the energy that is being taken out of a space.
Farm Credit helped Rahi build his dream of regenerative poultry farming and encouraging fellow immigrants to find community in agriculture.
Nothing beats a farm. I'm just pursuing happiness.
Learn more at farmcredit.com/beginning.
Farmers are always there for each other. We shed tears together, we celebrate together, but we also grow together. Farm Bureau is the largest general farm organization in the country. We have the farmers' back. If you're a farmer and you're not a member, we would welcome you into our Farm Bureau family. And if you want to know more about agriculture, come be part of this great family.
Welcome back. Last fall, USDA unveiled a new debt servicing approach for its most distressed borrowers. FSA Administrator Zach Ducheneaux says he hopes it's a long-term change.
I think the important point to take away from this is that the federal government has decided to take a different path than it did in the 1980s with the farm financial crisis, and use its resources to ensure that distressed borrowers have an opportunity to reposition themselves in light of the pandemic and rising input costs. And we're going to use that as the pivot, if you will, to a new way of doing this business, putting our best terms out there sooner instead of saving that for when things really fall apart. We think that we can offer better loan structuring to people at the front end of these so that they're able to amass some equity in their operation and maybe position themselves better to be resilient through equity and liquid assets instead of keeping them at that real fine margin.
Mm-hmm. What is the plan of attack in terms of determining when exactly a borrower is becoming distressed by the amount of debt on their loan?
Well, by virtue of the way we've interpreted our authorizing statute, I think a case could be made that all of our borrowers are in distress because they are those who cannot find credit elsewhere at reasonable rates and terms. And that means that for whatever reason, their economic circumstance doesn't align with the risk profiles of commercial lenders, credit unions, or even our friends in the farm credit system. So using that as the metric, most all of our borrowers can find some measure of distress. And that is to, the point of that point of the conversation is to really take a look at that authorizing statute and read the rest of it. And it says credit elsewhere sufficient to meet the actual needs of the borrower. And what are the actual needs of the borrower? Well, paying themselves a wage, putting some money away for retirement, maybe paying an education fund. If we have the terms available to us in our loan making to facilitate that type of improvement on the borrower's balance sheet, we should use it. And that's the concept that we're trying to advance.
So is this something that you think could eventually be applied to not only a specific subset of USDA borrowers that are exerting some financial pressure, but basically the entirety of USDA's loan portfolio?
I think what we do in our loan portfolio, Spencer, is an example that all other lenders should emulate. Because if you think about that interpretation of credit elsewhere and the segment of the population that almost relegates us to, and then you look at the performance of our direct farm ownership loans and our guaranteed farm ownership loans, which operate at a negative cost to the taxpayer, and they're helping producers who can't get credit elsewhere navigate some of the largest capital acquisitions in their career. Maybe everybody should be looking at what we do and seeing if there are ways that they can emulate that instead of having us just serve as the grooming, the proving ground, if you will, for borrowers to graduate into commercial credit. I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned from commercial credit in what we're doing and vice versa. So that's what I hope to have be the outcome of this.
So if these farm loan programs are indeed operating at a negative cost to the taxpayer, it's actually the converse way to say that it's a profitable venture for the U.S. government. Is this something that maybe the USDA should consider or Congress should consider reworking that statute to perhaps allow a greater amount of loan portfolio to be taken on by the department, and thus allowing a greater return? Or do you think the current structure of sort of the lender of last resort needs to stay in place?
I like the way the secretary rebranded it in his previous administration, the lender of first opportunity. And maybe we think about the lender of best opportunity. And then we talk about the things that we're doing that demonstrate the success of more flexible, longer term investment style of lending versus that high recapture and turnover of a bank's loan reserves or a credit union's loan funds.
Very good. Well, of course, a number of things to keep an eye on. This FSA loans so critical to producers across the country. And Administrator Ducheneaux, thanks for joining us. We'll be right back to hear from this week's panel. But first, our Hannah Pagel walks us through the next part of our Farm Bill Focus.
Title V in the Farm Bill is focused on credit. This title authorizes guaranteed loans and direct government loans to farmers and ranchers. Some Title V programs include the Conservation Loan and Loan Guarantee Program, Farm Ownership Loans, and Farm Operating Loans. Some Title V changes in the 2018 Farm Bill included an increase to the maximum loan size for guaranteed loans by about 25%, doubling the limit for direct farm ownership loans and increasing the direct operating loan limit by 1/3. One area to watch in this title is access to capital for socially disadvantaged farmers. The issue's recent history dates back to the American Rescue Plan and its efforts to forgive the debt of minority producers. That program was ultimately struck down in the courts. The Inflation Reduction Act took another step by offering $3.1 billion for distressed borrower relief. But with equity at the top of the agenda for many on Capitol Hill and in the Biden administration, expect to see access to credit for the nation's young, beginning, and socially disadvantaged producers to be a priority issue in the next Farm Bill. For Agri-Pulse, I'm Hannah Pagel.
Who's replacing petroleum and asphalt? You are. Who mapped the soybean genome for better varieties? You did. When you pool your resources through your soy checkoff, it all comes back to your bottom line. That's you as your soy checkoff.
Did you know Agri-Pulse has all your favorite podcasts, including Open Mic, Newsmakers, and Drive Time? Take us wherever you go. Subscribe at agripulse.com or on Spotify, Google Play, or Apple Podcasts.
It's not as simple just to wake up one day and go, I want to be a conservation farmer. You're changing how your farming practice is done. You're changing your operation.
Farm Credit supported John and Kelly Watley as they shifted to more sustainable farming, improving the environment where they farm and live. Learn more at farmcredit.com/climate.
Welcome back to Agri-Pulse Newsmakers. Excited to be joined by this week's panel to talk about some of the politics facing the Farm Bill and the amount of funding that it will have. Joined this week by Ethan Lane with the National Cattlemen's Beef Association and Mike Stranz with the National Farmers Union. Appreciate both of you joining us today. And Mike, I want to go to you first because we see a number of things shaping current Farm Bill discussions, including the debt ceiling debates, the overall budget on Capitol Hill, a number of outside external pressures facing whether or not that effort that many farm groups have to get new money into the legislation will be successful. As you sit here and kind of read the tea leaves, what do you think are the signals? What are the signals telling you about whether or not that infusion of new capital into this particular farm bill is something that could take place?
Given that it's springtime in a farm bill year, there's a few guideposts that we have to go by in the process to getting a farm bill done. We saw some of those go by already with the Congressional Budget Office's kind of initial projections back in February. We expect to see some probably in May or June. That'll be more of the actual markers for what we need to get done or what the budget parameters are for the Farm Bill. So in the next couple of weeks, we'll probably see more information there. And as you mentioned, the debt ceiling debate looms heavily off in the distance, which just in this case will be probably in June or July, it sounds like. So Congress will have to figure out what what the amount of money we have to work with is, and before then there'll be hearings to get ready for what the policies actually are.
Well, and another priority that we're seeing unfold here is on the part of the National Cattlemen's Beef Association and livestock producers in general, a big increase in participation in some of those livestock risk management programs that have been, increasingly critical in recent years for producers across the country. So, Ethan, going into this Farm Bill debate, how does NCBA plan to approach that issue, given the fact that, again, tight budget environment, but really big increases in participation on the part of these programs by cattle producers across the country?
Yeah, it's a big issue for our producers. Obviously, anybody that's been involved in this conversation over the last couple years has really learned in real time how few risk management tools there are for our cow-calf producers around the country. So in the changes that we've seen made to some of those programs like LRP in the last few years, we have seen a substantial increase in engagement in those programs. We see an appetite for more tools like that, those risk management tools that are easier for smaller producers to access and utilize. Obviously, we're in a much different price environment now. We set an all-time high for spot price for live cattle this week in the cattle market. So it's a good time to take stock of what is needed the next time we cycle through that market and what producers can really use. This is a good opportunity in the Farm Bill to educate about what's needed there. And obviously, we haven't played aggressively in that space in the past. So it's kind of a bit of new business for us to have that big a hand in this part of the conversation. But it's increasingly important for our producers to make sure they have those tools available.
We'll be right back with more from our panel right after this.
Who increased sales to Egypt 700%? You did. Who's the #1 protein in chicken feed? You are. When you pool your resources through your soy checkoff, it all comes back to your bottom line. That's you as your soy checkoff.
Agriculture Future of America is a nonprofit building transformational leaders in food and agriculture. AFA prepares college students to join the workforce as innovative and engaged young professionals who will shape the future of agriculture. Head to agfuture.org to find out how you can get involved.
The Senate and House Ag Committees are busy working on the next Farm Bill, which will cover commodities, specialty crops, livestock, and more. This legislation will impact every farmer, rancher, and rural business for the next 5 years. Make sure you don't miss insights and analytics that only Agri-Pulse and its top-notch team of well-connected experts can provide. Register today for a free trial at agripulse.com and click the subscribe button, or email us at pam@agri-pulse.com. You don't want to miss this Farm Bill coverage.
Welcome back. A number of folks in Washington are keeping a close eye on whether or not conservation spending in the Inflation Reduction Act will be reallocated in the upcoming Farm Bill. You can add to that list Ethan Lane with the National Cattlemen's Beef Association.
Well, I think we're in idea season, right? And everybody's trying to figure out different ways to get this large amount of spending covered in a way that's saleable, especially to a lot of these newer members of Congress that haven't done a farm bill before, that are uncomfortable with this kind of spending. That conservation money having already been allocated during that IRA conversation a year ago does make that job easier on the conservation side of the ledger, but those funds do need to stay in those programs for that to work. As Mike said, I would agree. I think there's still a lot of work to be done up on the Hill over the next few months, trying to figure out how those pieces all fit into place. We joined quite a few organizations in echoing that call to keep those funds where they were originally allocated. But that's going to be a conversation we're going to have to continue to stay involved with, because there's a lot of that sort of 83% of the bill that's not agriculture spending in those nutrition funds that is really becoming a hot topic, and it's hard to separate those two once you start looking at the top line for that bill.
Well, and those nutrition programs and some of the work requirements within them have kind of become a bit more of a political conversation, especially in the last couple of months. And I wonder if you could just kind of zoom out from Farm Bill issues maybe specifically and look at kind of the political dynamics facing Capitol Hill right now. We saw, one of the first things the House did was take several votes to actually elect a Speaker of the House. We have a very narrow margin in the Senate, and now one senator is staying in California for an extended period of time. If you can just kind of zoom out for me and assess the political dynamics of Capitol Hill, do you think they're conducive to passing a farm bill?
Gee, Spencer, thank you for the easy question. It is a challenging environment for sure for a farm bill. Like I said a minute ago, you have a lot of members of Congress that haven't done this before. You have a lot of staff that haven't done this before, helping them to understand why it's important to get this bill across the finish line, helping them understand why you have the two halves together, or the 3/4 and the 1/4 as part of the same bill. Is an education lift, and one that I think everybody in agriculture is deeply engaged in at the moment. But it is a difficult legislative environment.
Mike, I want to wrap up with you, and if I can ask you to put your staffer hat back on for a second, given the time that you spent on Capitol Hill in the last Farm Bill process, working with the House Ag Committee, you know as well as anyone in this town that a ton of behind-the-scenes work takes place to get a Farm Bill over the finish line, not only by the legislators that are actually voting on the floor, but by the staffers that are perhaps refining some of the language and doing some of these other negotiations to get that bill ready for final passage. Knowing that we're sitting here right now in mid-April without legislative text from either chamber, knowing that markups and conference committees and things of that nature still need to happen, a lot of folks came into this year with the goal to pass a Farm Bill on time. At what point do you think that expectation needs to be adjusted into a longer time frame?
Sure. Well, there's definitely some work going on behind the scenes that staff for both the House and Senate Agriculture committees are going through some of these issues and ideas that have come forward. Like Ethan said, we are in ideas season, but ideas season's been going on for a while too. So these staffers behind the scenes have been going through some of these, finding the rough edges, finding spots where they could connect a good idea with a member of Congress to champion it. Those sorts of things are all behind the scenes. Now, in the more public eye, sure, there's some question yet about when markups are going to be or when conference committees can assemble. But undoubtedly behind the scenes, there's a lot of work already going on. So that when political conditions get to a point where we've got clarity about the budget, we know that the coalition is come together and is forming to provide the political oomph to get this across the finish line. Once those things sort of align, a lot of the work's probably already been done behind the scenes to get that settled. So I know there's a series of hearings coming up in the Senate. We've been getting more updates about that. Undoubtedly, the House will have more as well that we're going to look forward to on the Farm Bill front. So those are more of the public-facing things, but behind those closed doors, a lot of the work's already getting done.
A lot of the work getting done, and a lot of the work is ongoing, including by the two people that joined us here on this panel this week. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us. We'll be right back with more Agri-Pulse Newsmakers, but first, our Lydia Johnson has a report on the reach of a costly but valuable technology for the nation's dairy farms.
The number of on-farm anaerobic digester systems has steadily increased since 2000. Digesters convert biosolids like livestock manure into sources of renewable energy. The number of digesters is tracked by AgStar, a collaborative program sponsored by the EPA and USDA. This chart shows the number of on-farm anaerobic digester systems in the U.S. between 2000 and 2021. There were 322 fully operational systems at the end of 2021, including 50 that started operating that year. Experts believe the growth corresponds to more demand for renewable fuel as a result of carbon trading and incentive programs. Biogas systems like digesters are also expected to benefit from provisions in the Inflation Reduction Act. About 78% of these systems are found on dairy farms. Digester adoption is highest in California, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. For Agri-Pulse, I'm Lydia Johnson.
Register now for the 2023 Agri-Pulse Food and Ag Issues Summit in California. The event will offer participants a full day of presentations and panel discussions. You can hear from members of the California Legislature, food and agriculture leaders, along with industry experts and academics. The summit takes place on June 5th at the Sheraton Grand Sacramento and through our virtual experience. View the latest information and register today under the Events tab at agripulse.com.
Looking closer, seeing further. That's how we do it. At Curious Plot, we're driven to find what's next for agriculture, animal care, and food. We stay curious because that's what it takes to grow understanding. That's how we plot strategies and tell stories that get results time after time. Marketing, communications, and consulting that look closer and see further. Curious Plot. We can't wait to help you tell your story.
Thanks again for tuning in for another episode of Agri-Pulse Newsmakers. Before we let you go, here's what's on the horizon for the upcoming week. Action returns to Capitol Hill as lawmakers in the House and Senate will be back in Washington. EPA Administrator Michael Regan is scheduled to talk to the House Ag Committee on Wednesday. Meanwhile, the National Association of Farm Broadcasting will hold its annual Washington Watch get-together Monday through Wednesday in the nation's capital. We'll keep our eyes on all of this and more at Agri-Pulse.com. For Agri-Pulse Newsmakers, I'm Spencer Chase. Have a good one. Newsmakers is a production of Agri-Pulse Communications. For more ag policy news, visit agripulse.com. You can also find our new content on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to follow Agri-Pulse and our correspondents on social media to get breaking news and more.